Right now, somewhere out there, someone is standing at the edge of a decision they haven't told anyone about, and that person is your soulmate. I want you to stop whatever you're doing for a second, because what I'm about to say might feel like it was written specifically about your life. Sometime in the last few days, maybe even the last few hours, your soulmate has been alone with a thought they're too afraid to say out loud, not to their friends, not to their family, not even fully to themselves, and that thought involves you. Here's the truth most people never get to see. Most people never actually witness the exact moment their soulmate almost broke. They only piece it together afterward, after the silence, after the sudden distance, after some strange shift in energy that made no sense at the time but suddenly makes perfect sense in hindsight. I want you to really sit with that for a second, because your mind is probably already trying to protect you from this thought. That's not an accident, and it's not weakness either. That's your psyche doing precisely what it was built to do, shielding you from anything that threatens your sense of safety before you're ready to actually face it. Carl Jung had a name for this hidden part of us. He called it the shadow. It's the part of you and the part of them that stays buried beneath the surface because it feels too dangerous, too raw, too honest to bring into the light. And right now, your soulmate's shadow is stirring. Something is rising in them that they can't fully control, can't quite explain, and are genuinely afraid to face head-on. This is where things get tricky. The human mind hates uncertainty. Given the choice, it will invent a story, any story, rather than sit inside the discomfort of simply not knowing. So think about what your own mind is doing right now as you read this. It's already guessing, already spinning theories. Is it doubt? Is it fear? Are they hiding something from you? Notice how quickly your brain jumped to an answer instead of just letting the uncertainty exist. That reflex, that urge to resolve tension immediately, is the exact same reflex your soulmate is wrestling with right now, except their version of that struggle is about you. Freud gave a name to what's happening under the surface with them. He called it repression, the oldest defense mechanism the mind has, one we develop before we even have words for our feelings. When an emotion feels too enormous, too threatening, too destabilizing to face directly, the mind doesn't erase it. It buries it. It pushes it down into the unconscious, where it doesn't vanish. It waits. It ferments. And eventually it leaks out sideways, through behavior that seems to have nothing to do with its real source. A sudden coldness, an unexplainable craving for space, a short temper over something trivial. None of that is random. Those are symptoms. They're the pressure of something buried, trying to find its way to the surface. Here's what they'll never openly admit. What they're repressing isn't rejection of you. It's the complete opposite. It's how much you actually mean to them. Because here's a truth almost nobody wants to say out loud. The people who frighten us the most aren't the ones we don't care about. They're the ones who have the power to completely undo us. Read that again, because it matters. If your soulmate didn't feel something massive toward you, there would be nothing there worth repressing in the first place. Repression only exists to shield the psyche from something powerful enough to threaten its stability. Indifference doesn't need defenses, only intensity does. So if you've picked up on distance, on silence, on a version of them that suddenly feels just out of reach, understand what you might actually be witnessing. Not the absence of feeling, but the overwhelming presence of it, just wearing a disguise. Most people miss this entirely. Most people read withdrawal as disinterest, because that's the simplest, least painful story available. But simple explanations are rarely the accurate ones when we're talking about the unconscious mind. The unconscious doesn't run on logic. It runs on symbol, on defense, on contradiction. And right now, your soulmate might be living inside a contradiction so intense it's tearing them in two directions at once, craving closeness while fearing it in the very same breath, wanting your presence while simultaneously pulling away from it, needing you and resisting that need as if it was some kind of weakness they can't afford to reveal. And that silence changes everything, because silence is never actually empty. Silence is information. Silence is often the loudest expression there is of an internal war that hasn't yet found its words. When your soulmate goes quiet, they aren't doing nothing. Internally, they're doing everything at once, negotiating with fear, wrestling old wounds, running simulations of every possible outcome, trying to figure out whether opening up to you would heal them or destroy them. Let's go a layer deeper, because this isn't only about them anymore. This is about you too, and about the part of yourself you might be avoiding by keeping your focus entirely on them. Jung believed the people who affect us most powerfully often act as mirrors. Not literal mirrors, but psychological ones, reflecting back the exact parts of ourselves we haven't yet come to terms with. If your soulmate is moving through something that genuinely terrifies them, ask yourself honestly, is there a version of that same terror living inside you too, one you've been sidestepping by staying laser-focused on theirs? That's often when the mind turns on them, and sometimes that's when it turns on you as well. Here's an uncomfortable truth almost nobody says out loud on this subject. Sometimes we fixate on our soulmate's inner crisis because it distracts us from our own. It's far easier to wonder what they're hiding than to ask what we're hiding. It's easier to dissect their silence than to sit with our own unprocessed fear of abandonment, of not being enough, of being loved and then losing it. So I need you to ask yourself something uncomfortable right now. Not about them, about you. When you imagine them pulling away, what's the very first emotion that rises in your chest? Is it concern for them, or is it fear for yourself? Because those two things are not the same, even though they love to disguise themselves as each other. If it's fear for yourself, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's simply human, but it does mean something worth paying attention to. It means part of what you've been calling worry about your soulmate might actually be an old wound of yours getting triggered. Maybe a wound from someone who left without ever explaining why. Maybe a wound from a childhood where love felt conditional, where affection could vanish without warning, where you learned early that closeness always carried the risk of sudden, unexplained loss. And this is where things get genuinely dangerous, because if that wound is active in you right now, it will warp the way you interpret everything they do. One unanswered message will feel like abandonment. A slightly shorter phone call will feel like rejection. Your nervous system, shaped by old pain, will respond not to what's actually happening but to what once happened, projected onto the present moment. This isn't a personal flaw, it's simply how the human brain survives. It generalizes danger so it can protect you faster the next time around. But it also means that right now, in this exact moment, you might be fighting two battles simultaneously, theirs and your own, without even realizing you've merged them into one. Let's go even deeper, because we haven't reached the real core of this yet. What if I told you that your soulmate's crisis and your own unspoken fear aren't two separate events, but two expressions of the very same unconscious pattern? Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, moments when inner psychological states line up with outer events in ways that feel far too precise to be random chance. Two people bonded closely enough will often begin destabilizing around the same time, not because one is causing the other, but because they're entangled inside a shared psychological field. Their crisis stirs something in you. Your unresolved material stirs something in them. It isn't coincidence, it's resonance. But here's the truth. Most people never dig deep enough to actually understand this, because doing so demands the one thing the ego resists more than anything else: honest self-examination with no escape hatch available. So let's not take the escape hatch. Let's keep going. What is your soulmate actually afraid of? Not the surface-level fear. Not will this work out or am I making the right choice? Underneath all of that, there's almost always a deeper fear, one that predates you entirely. The fear of losing themselves inside a bond that feels bigger than anything they know how to control. Because real intimacy, the kind that reaches into the unconscious, the kind that feels like recognition rather than a decision, doesn't just threaten loneliness. It threatens identity itself. Think about what it actually means to be truly known by another person. Not liked, not admired, known, seen in all the places you've spent your entire life hiding, the contradictions, the wounds, the parts of yourself you've quietly edited out of public view. Being genuinely known by someone else is one of the most vulnerable experiences a human being can go through. And your soulmate may be standing right at that threshold with you now, on the edge of being fully seen. Every defense mechanism they've constructed since childhood is firing off simultaneously, urging them to retreat before they lose themselves entirely inside that closeness. That's the part they never admit. Not to you, not to their closest friends, and sometimes not even to themselves in the quiet privacy of their own mind. Because admitting it means admitting vulnerability, and for a psyche that's been hurt before, vulnerability doesn't register as intimacy, it registers as danger. Let's pause here for a moment, because there's a layer most people skip past too quickly. The reason this kind of crisis feels so disorienting to watch unfold is that it never follows a straight line. It's not one clean emotion moving toward one clean resolution. It's cyclical. One day they seem closer than they've ever been, saying things that make your chest ache with hope. The next day they feel 1,000 miles away and you're left replaying every word, hunting for the exact moment it all went wrong. But here's the truth. There was no single moment. What you're watching unfold isn't a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's an oscillation. Approach, retreat, approach, retreat. The precise rhythm of an unconscious mind trying to negotiate between desire and fear at the same time, unable to fully commit to either because both feel equally true. Jung described this as the tension of opposites, the idea that real psychological growth doesn't come from picking one side and eliminating the other, but from holding both extremes at once until something entirely new emerges out of the friction between them. Your soulmate isn't torn between wanting you and not wanting you. They're torn between the version of themselves that learned to survive by staying guarded and the version of themselves that's starting to believe, maybe for the first time, that staying guarded around you might not actually be necessary anymore. That belief terrifies people more than almost anything else because it means dismantling a defense system built brick by brick, painful moment by painful moment, sometimes over years, sometimes over decades. What they never admit is just how exhausting it is to live inside that back and forth, to want to reach out and pull back in the very same breath, to draft a message and delete it, to almost say the true thing and say something smaller instead. This isn't dishonesty. It's survival, just wearing the mask of hesitation. And if you've been on the receiving end of that hesitation, wondering why someone who so clearly feels something can't simply say it plainly, understand this. Plain honesty requires a level of psychological safety that not everyone has had the chance to build yet. Some people learned early on that saying the true thing out loud got them hurt, dismissed, or abandoned. So the mind adapts. It learns to speak in fragments, in mixed signals, in silence, not because the feeling isn't real, but because the feeling has never once been safe enough to say directly. Let's talk about what's actually happening in their nervous system right now, because this isn't just psychological theory, it's physiological reality. When closeness with you intensifies, their body doesn't only register warmth, it registers activation, a subtle, often unconscious stress response, the same neural pathways that once fired during earlier moments of relational threat. Their heart, biologically speaking, doesn't distinguish between this person might leave me and this person might overwhelm me completely. Both register as danger to a nervous system shaped by old attachment wounds. And this is where the pattern becomes almost predictable if you know what you're looking for. Closeness increases, fear increases, and instead of putting that fear into words, the mind reroutes it into behavior, distance, irritability, sudden unavailability, overthinking, second-guessing the entire foundation of the relationship. Not because the foundation is weak, but because the foundation is strong enough to threaten walls they built long before they ever met you. Most people don't see this clearly. Most people, watching their soulmate withdraw, assume the connection is failing. In reality, the exact opposite might be happening. The bond might be succeeding so completely that it's triggering every unresolved fear the other person has spent their whole life avoiding. But here's the truth. None of this is permanent. Psychological patterns aren't life sentences, they're maps of old survival strategies that have simply outlived their usefulness. And the fact that your soulmate is struggling right now doesn't mean the connection is broken. It might actually mean the opposite. It might mean the connection has finally grown deep enough to reach a place inside them that's never been touched before. Let's go further still, because there's another layer beneath even this one. Freud believed a large portion of adult behavior is what he called repetition compulsion, an unconscious drive to recreate unresolved emotional patterns from the past, usually carrying the hidden hope of finally resolving them differently this time. If your soulmate lived through earlier relationships where closeness led to abandonment, betrayal, or a loss of self, some part of their unconscious mind may be testing you right now without even realizing it. Not deliberately, not manipulatively, instinctively creating distance simply to see whether you'll disappear the way others did or whether you'll stay in a way no one ever has before. This is one of the more uncomfortable truths in all of psychology. We often unconsciously recreate the very pain we're most desperate to avoid because some part of us is still quietly trying to rewrite the ending. And that silence changes everything, because inside that silence, a test is quietly running. Not a test you were ever told about, not a test with visible rules. An unconscious test run by a part of their mind that doesn't operate on logic, asking one question over and over again. Is this safe enough to stay inside of, or will it end the way everything else once did? Now here's where the psychological pressure builds toward its peak, because I need you to understand something most people never say clearly. You cannot pass this test by chasing. You cannot pass it by over-explaining. You cannot pass it by trying to logically talk an unconscious fear out of existing, because the unconscious doesn't respond to logic. It responds to consistency, to patience, and to the absence of exactly the reaction it's most afraid of provoking. If their deepest fear is abandonment, panic from you will confirm it. If their deepest fear is losing themselves, pressure from you will confirm it. If their deepest fear is being too much, urgency from you will confirm it. That's when the mind turns against them, because the very outcome they're afraid of becomes more likely the harder they try to protect themselves from it, and the harder you try to prevent it. This is the paradox sitting right at the center of your soulmate's current crisis. Their fear of losing you might be the very thing pulling them toward the loss they're afraid of. Their fear of losing themselves might be the very thing pushing them away from the one connection capable of helping them find themselves. And your own fear of losing them might be the very thing driving you to act in ways that widen the distance instead of closing it. I want you to really feel the weight of that for a moment before we go any further, because this is the turning point everything else has been building toward. The uncomfortable truth is this: neither of you is doing anything wrong. You're both simply responding exactly the way two nervous systems shaped by past pain are wired to respond when they run into something real enough to actually matter. The crisis your soulmate is facing isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of significance. Nothing this intense gets activated over something that doesn't matter. The mind doesn't go to war over things it doesn't care about. So what do you actually do with all of this? Not perform a certainty you don't feel, not chase after a clarity that isn't ready to be given yet, not force resolution onto a process that's still unfolding beneath the surface, in places neither of you can fully see. What you do is become the one steady variable inside their internal chaos, the one thing that doesn't confirm their fear. You become steady in a place where their history has been unstable. You become present without becoming desperate. You become someone whose care doesn't collapse under pressure and whose presence doesn't vanish the moment things get complicated. Not because you're passive and not because you're pretending nothing is happening, but because you understand, on a level most people never reach, that what they're going through has almost nothing to do with logic and almost everything to do with the oldest, most unresolved parts of who they are. And here's the final layer, the one that ties everything together. The reason this connection feels so different, the reason it feels less like a choice and more like recognition, is because bonds like this don't just activate romantic feeling. They activate everything unfinished inside both people at once. That isn't a flaw in the connection. That is, in many ways, the entire purpose of it. Some bonds exist specifically to bring buried material to the surface, not to destroy the relationship, but to force both people to finally face what they've been avoiding for years, sometimes decades, sometimes for the better part of their lives. Your soulmate's crisis was never separate from your own story. It never was. It's a single thread inside a shared unconscious pattern the two of you are living out simultaneously, whether either of you has the language for it yet or not. What they're wrestling with right now isn't some random event. It's the natural, inevitable outcome of two psyches colliding with enough force to expose what neither of you could see clearly on your own. Most people will read all of this and assume it's only about their soulmate. It isn't. It's also about the part of you that recognized a little too much of this, a little too clearly. It's about the fear you've been quietly calling concern. It's about the old wound you've been projecting onto present-day silence. It's about the test you didn't even realize you were also taking. So drop the illusion right now. Stop pretending this is purely their crisis to work through alone. Stop pretending your only role here is to sit quietly on the sidelines while they figure themselves out. And stop pretending your own fear, your own history, your own unconscious patterns have nothing to do with what's unfolding between the two of you. Because here's the final truth this entire piece has been building toward from the very first line. The biggest thing your soulmate is facing right now isn't really a decision about you. It's a confrontation with themselves. And you happen to be standing close enough as the mirror to make that confrontation impossible to keep avoiding. That isn't a burden, and it isn't a curse. Whether either of you can fully see it yet or not, it's actually one of the rarest and most transformative gifts two people can offer each other, the chance to finally stop running from the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. There's one more layer worth naming before we close, because it explains why this particular bond feels unlike anything either of you has experienced before. Jung believed every person carries an inner figure representing their opposite psychological polarity. He used the terms anima and animus, though stripped of their dated framing. The idea simply describes an inner image of wholeness we unconsciously search for in another person. When we meet someone who seems to activate that image with uncanny precision, the encounter doesn't feel like meeting a stranger. It feels like remembering someone. That sense of recognition, the feeling that this connection is somehow older than the actual time you've known each other, isn't some mystical accident. It's projection. The unconscious mind casting its own hidden wholeness onto another human being and mistaking the reflection for the source itself. This is exactly why soulmate bonds feel so uniquely destabilizing. You're not simply relating to a person, you're relating to a symbol your own psyche has built, layered on top of a real, flawed, complicated human being who can never perfectly match the image projected onto them. Every bond like this eventually reaches a moment where that projection cracks, where the idealized image gives way to the real person underneath, contradictions and all. That moment often gets mistaken for falling out of love. In truth, it's usually the opposite. It's often the actual beginning of real love, the kind that survives seeing someone clearly instead of loving a symbol standing in for them. That's when the mind betrays them one final time, not through fear of losing you, but through fear of loving you without the illusion, fear of choosing the real, imperfect, unpredictable version of you instead of the idealized image that always felt safer to love because it could never disappoint. And that's often the true content of the crisis your soulmate is facing. Not whether they want you, but whether they can survive wanting the real you, fully seen, illusions collapsed, with nothing left to hide behind. Push past the discomfort of that thought instead of retreating from it, because this is the exact moment most people close the video and go back to distraction instead of sitting with what they now understand. Don't do that. Let the realization finish landing. Let yourself fully feel what it means that the person shaking your sense of certainty right now might be doing so, not because the bond is failing, but because it has finally become real enough to matter. So the next time you notice that distance, that silence, that strange, unexplainable shift, don't panic and don't retreat into your own old defenses either. Recognize it for what it actually is. Not the end of something, but the beginning of the only kind of closeness that was ever going to be real in the first place, the kind that survives contact with the truth. And that's the part almost nobody tells you about a bond this deep. It was never going to be easy. It was only ever going to be worth it.